Sarah Chun thought she was just answering a simple online ad for easy money. She had no idea she was about to become part of the most disturbing psychological experiment of her life. The email seemed innocent enough. Earn $200 for 48 hours of research participation. No experience necessary. With student loans crushing her and her part-time barista job barely covering rent, Sarah clicked reply without hesitation. Dr. Marcus Kellerman's research facility looked nothing like the sterile university lab Sarah expected. Located in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Portland, the building felt more like an abandoned movie set than a place of serious academic study. As Sarah parked her beaten Honda Civic, she noticed other participants arriving, a mix of college students, unemployed 20-somethings, and desperate-looking middle-aged folks. Everyone shared the same hungry look in their eyes, the kind that comes from needing money more than asking questions. The lobby buzzed with nervous energy as 24 participants filled out paperwork. Sarah recognized a few faces from her community college, Jake Morrison from her psychology class, and Maria Santos, who worked at the campus bookstore. The forms were surprisingly detailed, asking about family history, mental health, and personal relationships. Sarah hesitated at the question about authority figures in her childhood, memories of her controlling stepfather flooding back. She checked complicated and moved on. Dr. Kellerman emerged from behind, frosted glass doors with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Tall, silver-haired, and wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the industrial setting, he commanded immediate attention. His smile was warm, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. Sarah felt an uncomfortable chill, but dismissed it as pre-experiment nerves. "Welcome, everyone," Dr. Kellerman's voice carried easily across the room. "You're about to participate in a groundbreaking study on workplace dynamics and authority structures. This research will help us understand how people respond to leadership in high-pressure environments." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "Some of you will be designated as supervisors, others as workers. Your job is to follow the protocols we've established. Nothing more, nothing more." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd expected questionnaire and observations, not role-playing scenarios. But $200 was $200, and her credit card statement wasn't going to pay itself. The participants were randomly divided into two groups. Sarah found herself among the 12 designated supervisors, given crisp white lab coats and clipboards with detailed instruction sheets. The other 12 received gray uniforms and were labeled workers. The transformation was immediate and unsettling. People Sarah had been chatting with minutes earlier now avoided eye contact, already slipping into their assigned roles. Maria, now dressed in gray, looked smaller somehow. Jake, sporting a white coat like Sarah's, stood straighter, his jaw set in a way she'd never seen before. The uniforms were doing something to everyone, creating invisible walls where none had existed moments ago. Dr. Kellerman led the supervisors to a separate briefing room. The walls were lined with monitors showing different areas of the facility, workstations, break rooms, and what looked like small windowless offices. Your job is to ensure productivity and compliance, he explained, handing out electronic devices that looked like modified tablets. These tools will help you monitor and manage your assigned workers. The success of this experiment depends on your commitment to maintaining authority. Sarah stared at the device in her hands. The interface was surprisingly sophisticated, with options for performance tracking, compliance monitoring, and something ominously labeled corrective measures. A sick feeling grew in her stomach as she realized this wasn't going to be the simple observation study she'd signed up for. "What exactly are these corrective measures?" asked a thin man named Robert, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kellerman's smile never wavered. "Nothing harmful, I assure you. Simple consequences for non-compliance. Withholding break privileges, extending work periods, isolation for reflection. Standard workplace management techniques." The way he said "standard" made Sarah's skin crawl. The first shift began immediately. Sarah was assigned 3 workers, including Maria. They were given mundane tasks: sorting papers, data entry, organizing supplies. Simple enough, but the atmosphere in the work area felt heavy with unspoken tension. The workers moved carefully, glancing frequently at the supervisors and the cameras mounted in every corner. Maria made the first mistake 20 minutes in. She started chatting with another worker instead of focusing on her assigned task. Sarah's tablet immediately flashed a red alert. Compliance violation detected, supervisor action required. A menu appeared with options ranging from verbal warning to immediate isolation. Sarah's finger hovered over the screen. This was just role-playing, right? Just an experiment. But looking at Maria's nervous face, seeing how the other supervisors were already implementing corrective measures with increasing enthusiasm, Sarah realized something terrifying was happening. The line between experiment and reality was dissolving faster than anyone had anticipated. She selected verbal warning and approached Maria, her heart pounding. "Focus on your work," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice gentle. But Maria flinched as if she'd been shouted at, immediately ducking her head and returning to her papers with frightened urgency. Sarah looked around the room and saw transformation everywhere. Jake was standing over his assigned workers with his arms crossed, his face set in harsh lines. Another supervisor, a quiet woman named Beth, was writing detailed notes about every minor infraction she observed. The workers moved like frightened animals, their earlier personalities completely submerged under their gray uniforms and growing fear. As the first hour ended, Sarah realized with growing horror that Dr. Kellerman hadn't recruited them for a simple workplace study. He'd created a prison, and somehow, impossibly, they were all becoming exactly who their roles demanded them to be. The transformation had begun. By hour 3, Sarah barely recognized the people around her. The transformation was happening so gradually, so naturally, that it felt like watching a slow-motion car accident. Jake, who used to share his lunch with struggling classmates, now documented every minor mistake his workers made with disturbing precision. Beth, previously soft-spoken and kind, had developed a sharp edge to her voice that made everyone freeze when she spoke. Sarah tried to resist the pull, but her tablet kept buzzing with notifications. Productivity below baseline. Worker talking during task time. Unauthorized break detected. Each alert came with suggested responses, and the pressure to maintain order grew stronger with every passing minute. Dr. Kellerman moved through the facility like a ghost, observing from the shadows, taking notes, never interfering but always watching. The workers were changing too, but in the opposite direction. Maria, once confident and outgoing, now asked permission before doing anything. She'd started calling Sarah ma'am without being told to. The other workers displayed similar shifts, shoulders hunched, voices quieter, movements more careful and deliberate. It was as if their personalities were being slowly erased, replaced by something smaller and more fearful. During the lunch break, the two groups ate in separate areas. Sarah sat with the other supervisors, and the conversation made her stomach turn. They were discussing their workers like livestock, comparing productivity rates and compliance scores. Robert, the quiet man from the morning briefing, now spoke with authority about managing difficult personalities and the importance of consistent discipline. My worker number 7 needed correction 3 times this morning, Jake said, cutting into his sandwich with mechanical precision. Had to implement isolation protocol. 10 minutes in room C, very effective. He said it like he was discussing the weather, completely detached from the fact that worker number 7 was Tommy, a 19-year-old kid who'd been laughing and joking that same morning. Sarah pushed food around her plate, appetite gone. Through the glass partition, she could see the workers eating in silence, their gray uniforms making them look like inmates. Maria caught her eye for a moment, and Sarah saw something that made her heart break. Maria looked grateful for the brief acknowledgement, as if any attention from a supervisor was a gift to be treasured. The afternoon brought new protocols. Dr. Kellerman announced that productivity needed to increase, and supervisors were now authorized to use enhanced motivation techniques. Sarah's tablet updated with new options, extended work periods, reduced breaks, and something called reflection time in isolated rooms. The other supervisors received this news with enthusiasm that chilled Sarah to her core. Finally, Beth muttered, adjusting her white coat. Some real tools to work with. Sarah watched in horror as her colleagues embraced their roles with increasing fervor. They began implementing the new protocols immediately, extending work shifts and cutting break times. The workers accepted these changes without question, their earlier personalities now completely buried under layers of learned helplessness. When worker number 3, a college student named David, made a simple filing error, his supervisor ordered him to reflection time. Sarah watched through the monitors as David was led to a small windowless room with nothing but a chair and a table. The door closed with a heavy click, and David sat alone, staring at the walls. The supervisor set a timer for 30 minutes and returned to overseeing his other workers as if nothing had happened. Sarah's tablet buzzed again. Maria had been caught glancing at the clock, a violation of the focus protocols that had been established that morning. The suggested response was immediate isolation. Sarah's hands trembled as she looked at the options. Around her, Other supervisors were making similar decisions with casual efficiency. She approached Maria, who immediately stood straighter and looked down at the floor. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just checking the time. I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Sarah whispered, but the words felt wrong in her mouth. Nothing about this was okay. She selected the mildest option available, a written warning. But even that felt like a betrayal of everything she believed about treating people with dignity. As the day wore on, Sarah noticed her own behavior changing despite her best efforts. She found herself standing taller, speaking with more authority, viewing the workers' mistakes as personal affronts rather than simple human errors. The uniform was doing something to her mind, creating distance between her and the people she was supposed to be monitoring. The workers' transformation was even more dramatic. They moved like sleepwalkers, responding to every command without question. When one supervisor ordered a worker to do jumping jacks as punishment for talking, the young man complied immediately, his face blank and accepting. The others watched without protest, as if this was now normal, acceptable behavior. Dr. Kellerman appeared at Sarah's shoulder during the final hour of day 1. "Fascinating, isn't it?" he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "How quickly we adapt to our circumstances. How readily we accept new definitions of normal." Sarah wanted to tell him this was wrong, that they needed to stop before things went too far. But looking around the facility, seeing how completely everyone had embraced their roles, she realized it might already be too late. The experiment had taken on a life of its own. "The real test comes tomorrow," Dr. Kellerman continued, his voice carrying a note of anticipation that made Sarah's skin crawl, "when we introduce the competition protocols. When supervisors start competing against each other for performance ratings. When the stakes get higher." As day 1 ended and participants were dismissed to return home, Sarah noticed something that terrified her more than anything else that had happened. Walking to their cars, supervisors and workers naturally separated into different groups, maintaining the artificial hierarchy even outside the facility. The roles were bleeding into reality, transforming people at their core. Sarah drove home in silence, still wearing her white coat, already dreading tomorrow while simultaneously looking forward to the authority it would bring. Sarah woke up at 5 on day 2 and realized she was excited to return to the facility. The thought horrified her. She'd spent the evening researching psychological experiments, reading about Stanford prison experiment, Milgram's obedience studies, and other notorious research projects. Every article she found warned about the same thing, how quickly ordinary people could become monsters when given authority over others. But knowing the history didn't make her immune to the pull. Standing in front of her bathroom mirror, Sarah found herself looking forward to putting on the white coat again, to the feeling of control it gave her, to the respect it commanded from the workers. The realization made her sick, but not sick enough to walk away from the $200 she desperately needed. The facility felt different on day 2. The casual atmosphere from the first morning was completely gone, replaced by military-like efficiency. Supervisors arrived early, comparing notes about their workers' performance, discussing strategies for maintaining order. The workers entered silently, heads down, moving directly to their assigned stations without the nervous chatter that had filled the first day. Dr. Kellerman introduced the new protocols with barely contained excitement. "Today we implement competitive performance metrics," he announced to the supervisors in their morning briefing. "Your effectiveness will be ranked against your peers. The top-performing supervisors will receive bonus compensation and additional authority privileges. The bottom performers will face consequences." Sarah felt her stomach drop, but around her, the other supervisors leaned forward with interest. Jake actually smiled, a cold expression she'd never seen on his face before. "What kind of additional authority?" he asked. "Expanded disciplinary options, extended isolation periods, performance-based worker privileges, or the removal of such privileges." Dr. Kellerman's eyes glittered as he spoke. "The workers will be informed that their treatment depends entirely on their supervisors' rankings. This should motivate everyone appropriately." The competitive element transformed everything instantly. Supervisors who had been colleagues the day before now viewed each other as obstacles to overcome. They began monitoring each other as closely as they watched their workers, looking for any advantage that might improve their ranking. Sarah tried to maintain her gentler approach, but the pressure was overwhelming. Her tablet now displayed not just her workers' performance metrics, but her own ranking among supervisors. She was currently 7th out of 12, and watching that number made her chest tight with anxiety she couldn't explain. Maria made another mistake 20 minutes into the morning shift, accidentally knocking over a cup of water while reaching for a file. It was the kind of minor accident that would have been laughed off in any normal workplace, but here it became a crisis. Sarah's tablet immediately flashed alerts about the incident, and she could see other supervisors watching to see how she'd handle it. "Room C, 15 minutes, Sarah heard herself say, the words coming out before she could stop them. Maria's face went pale, but she nodded and walked toward the isolation room without argument. Sarah watched her go and felt simultaneously guilty and satisfied, guilty for the punishment, but satisfied that her worker was compliant, well-trained, obedient. The realization of what she was becoming hit her like a physical blow. She was thinking of Maria as her worker, as property to be managed, rather than a human being to be treated with dignity. The transformation she'd been fighting was happening anyway, creeping through her defenses with insidious efficiency. Around the facility, things were escalating rapidly. Beth had implemented a point-based system for her workers, docking points for infractions and awarding them for exceptional performance. Workers were now competing against each other within their groups, reporting each other's mistakes to their supervisors in hopes of gaining favor. Jake had taken a different approach, ruling his section through intimidation and unpredictable punishment. His workers moved with fearful precision, jumping at shadows, terrified of making any mistake that might draw his attention. One of his workers, a middle-aged man named Carl, had started stammering when speaking to supervisors, a speech impediment that hadn't existed the day before. The isolation rooms were now in constant use. Workers were sent there for increasingly minor infractions, looking at supervisors too long, not looking at supervisors enough, working too slowly, working too quickly, asking questions, not asking questions. The contradictory expectations created an atmosphere of constant anxiety where any action might be wrong. During the lunch break, Sarah overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two supervisors were discussing ways to break particularly resistant workers, sharing techniques they developed to make their people more compliant. They spoke with the casual expertise of experienced prison guards, not college students who'd started this experiment 36 hours earlier. The trick is consistency, Beth explained to a newer supervisor. Never let them predict what you'll do next. Keep them off balance. Fear of the unknown is more powerful than fear of known consequences. Sarah wanted to object, to remind them that these were their peers, their classmates, their neighbors. But the words died in her throat. Looking at her ranking, now 5th out of 12 after Maria's isolation punishment, she felt a surge of pride that disgusted her even as she experienced it. The afternoon brought crisis. One of the workers, Tommy, the 19-year-old kid who'd been Jake's frequent target, finally snapped. He stood up during a work period, threw his papers on the floor, and shouted, "This is insane. We're not prisoners. We're not your slaves." The facility went silent. Everyone, supervisors and workers alike, stared at Tommy as if he'd committed an unforgivable sin. Jake's face flushed red with rage, and he reached for his tablet immediately. "Room at 2 hours," Jake barked. Disruptive behavior, insubordination, destruction of work materials. Tommy looked around desperately, seeking support from his fellow workers. But they all looked away, terrified that associating with his rebellion might bring punishment down on them. Even the other supervisors avoided eye contact, unwilling to challenge Jake's authority or appear sympathetic to worker dissent. As Tommy was led away to the isolation room, Sarah realized they had crossed a line from which there might be no return. The experiment had become real, and they were all trapped inside it. Tommy's screams started an hour into his isolation. Sarah heard them through the facility's ventilation system, raw. Desperate sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than fear. She looked around for support, for someone else who might be disturbed by what they were hearing. But the other supervisors continued their work with practiced indifference. Probably just acting out for attention, Beth commented casually, not even looking up from her performance reports. They do that sometimes. Best to ignore it. The casual dehumanization in her voice made Sarah's skin crawl, but what terrified her more was how reasonable Beth sounded. How normal this had all become in less than 48 hours. Sarah found herself nodding agreement before catching herself, horrified how easily she'd almost dismissed another human being's suffering. Dr. Kellerman appeared in the supervisor area with obvious excitement. "Excellent work, everyone. We're seeing fascinating developments in behavioral modification and authority acceptance. Your commitment to your roles is producing remarkable data." He paused, scanning their faces with scientific interest. I have one final protocol to implement before our experiment concludes." Sarah felt a chill of premonition. Nothing good could come from Dr. Kellerman's excitement. "We're introducing peer evaluation. Each supervisor will now assess the performance of their colleagues. Those ranked in the bottom 3 will join the workers for the final 6 hours of the experiment. Those in the top 3 will receive enhanced authority status and additional compensation." The announcement transformed the supervisors instantly. Any remaining collegiality evaporated as they began eyeing each other with predatory calculation. Sarah watched Jake immediately start taking notes about other supervisors' interactions with their workers, looking for weaknesses to exploit in his evaluations. The competition had moved beyond managing workers to destroying each other. Sarah's tablet buzzed with the new evaluation interface. She was supposed to rate her fellow supervisors on categories like authority maintenance, discipline consistency, and worker compliance achievement. Looking at the categories made her realize how completely they'd all been manipulated into becoming exactly what Dr. Kellerman wanted them to be. Tommy's screaming had stopped, replaced by something worse, complete silence from room as Sarah tried to focus on her work. But her eyes kept drifting to the monitor showing the isolation room. Tommy sat motionless in the corner, staring at nothing, his earlier defiance completely broken. "Textbook learned helplessness," Dr. Kellerman murmured, appearing beside Sarah to observe the monitor. "Beautiful to witness in real time. The human mind's capacity for adaptation never ceases to amaze me." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "He's just a kid." "He's a research subject," Dr. Kellerman corrected gently. "As are you all. Though I must say, you've exceeded every expectation. The speed of your transformation, the completeness of your role adoption, simply extraordinary." The words hit Sarah like ice water. Research subject. She looked around the facility with new eyes and saw it clearly for the first time. They weren't participants in a study about workplace dynamics. They were the experiment. Dr. Kellerman wasn't studying workplace authority. He was studying them. How quickly ordinary people would abuse power when given permission and incentive to do so. "You're not researching workplace dynamics at all," Sarah whispered, the pieces falling together with horrible clarity. "You're recreating the Stanford prison experiment. You're studying how fast we'd become monsters." Dr. Kellerman smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "Very good, Sarah. I wondered when someone would figure it out. Though I prefer to think of it as studying the malleable nature of human morality. How quickly ethical boundaries can be redrawn when circumstances change." Sarah looked around the facility and saw it all clearly now. The gradual escalation, the competitive pressures, the dehumanizing language and procedures, the cameras recording everything. They'd been manipulated from the first moment, guided step by step into becoming exactly the kind of people they would have condemned just 2 days earlier. "The real question," Dr. Kellerman continued, "is what you'll do with this knowledge. Will you break character and try to save your fellow participants? Will you continue playing your role because you need the money? Or have you discovered something about yourself that you'd rather not acknowledge?" Sarah's mind raced. She could expose everything, try to get everyone to stop, demand they all walk away. But looking around the facility, seeing how completely everyone had embraced their roles, she wondered if it was even possible anymore. Jake was writing furious notes for his peer evaluations, his face twisted with competitive hunger. Beth was implementing new punishment protocols with scientific precision. The workers moved like broken dolls, their personalities completely submerged under learned fear. Even knowing the truth, Sarah felt the pull of her role. She was 5th in the supervisor rankings now. With good peer evaluations, she could move higher, gain more authority, earn more money. The white coat felt comfortable on her shoulders. The respect in the workers' eyes when they looked at her felt good, even if it was based on fear. Her tablet buzzed with an urgent alert. One of her workers, Maria, had been caught helping another worker with a task, a clear violation of the individual performance protocols. Sarah's finger hovered over the punishment options, and she realized this was her test. Knowing what she knew now, would she still participate in the systematic destruction of human dignity? Maria looked up at her with frightened, hopeful eyes, still trusting that Sarah might show mercy, might remember their shared humanity. Around the facility, supervisors and workers continued their roles with mechanical precision, trapped in an experiment that had become their reality. Sarah looked at Dr. Kellerman, who watched her with scientific fascination, waiting to see what she would choose. She looked at her tablet screen, at the punishment options that had become so familiar. She looked at Maria, who represented every person who had ever trusted authority to treat them fairly. The timer was running out. In 6 hours, the experiment would end. The question was whether any of them would survive it with their souls intact. Sarah made her choice. Don't let this story end here. If this psychological thriller gripped you, if it made you question what you might do under pressure, then you need to share it. Subscribe for more mind-bending stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature. Comment below, what would you have done in Sarah's position? Because the truth is, we're all just one situation away from discovering who we really are.